But first, returning to the stage 3 tax cuts, coalition not opposing Labor's changes while rightly criticising the Prime Minister for his broken promise. Now, it's worth noting that this isn't the coalition voting for Labor's bills, rather waving it through with a pledge of taking their own policy for simpler and fairer taxes to the next election. Joining me now to discuss this and more, Shadow Attorney General Michaelia Cash. Michaelia, thank you for your time. The PM's trying to use the coalition changing your mind as somehow moving on from his broken promise. This is different, though. You haven't let him go on that issue, have you?
Absolutely not. There's only one liar in the lodge, Peter, and that is Anthony Albanese. This is the Prime Minister of Australia who looked Australians in the eye knowingly and repeatedly and lied to them. It is because of the Prime Minister's lies and broken promises that the stage 3 tax cuts, as legislated, it's now impossible to deliver them. And why do we say that? Because you'd need to find, Peter, around $9 billion extra per year. And as you know, that is no easy feat. But what did the Prime Minister do? Let's have a look at what he did. He took the money that was in the stage 3 tax cuts, he applied it to his own policy, and then you've got to say to yourself, now, why would he do that? Well, Peter, as you and I know, because he needed a political dividend before the Dunkley by-election. That's the decision of the Prime Minister, political dividend in Dunkley. He has lied to Australians and he has trashed his reputation in the process.
He said, the Prime Minister, in mid-January on camera before the Parliament returned, that he was backing in those tax cuts. He would do as legislated. Your colleague Jane Hume found out in Treasury questioning the other day, I think it was yesterday, that in fact that the Treasury officials were working on revised tax cuts way back in December.
Absolutely. You cannot trust a thing the Prime Minister says going forward. This is a man who, prior to the election, Peter, made so many promises. He is failing to deliver on so many of them. Let's start on the $275 reduction in your energy bill. They can't even mention the word 275. Then you have a look at the legislated tax cuts. Over 100 times he looked Australians in the eye, up until recently, Peter, and he said, my word is my bond. So, Peter, when they now talk about negative gearing, franking credits, and the family home, and they say, we're not going to touch them, what I say to Australians is this.
No one believes
you have
them.
A liar in the lodge. Don't believe a word this Prime Minister says. If you do, it's to your detriment.
Yeah, it's a big call to trash your Prime Minister's reputation for all of $15 a week. And I think when Australians work out that's all they get for this broken promise, I think that's where the tables will turn. Let's go to some other issues related to your portfolio. This struck me as extraordinary. The CFMEU and WA have got a 25% pay rise deal. Construction workers will go from $152,000 a year to $194,000 a year. Now, I don't begrudge workers getting a decent pay rise, but this is 25%. We've got insolvencies. Over 800 companies have gone to the wall in construction alone. And of course, we saw yesterday the massive company St Heliers, well, they've gone under. This is not going to help our housing woes, is it?
Peter, like you, I don't begrudge anybody a pay rise. The issue, however, with the unions negotiating these types of agreements is you've got to ask, what's the productivity increase? Because it's only with a productivity increase do you A, get increased prosperity, and B, sustainable wage rises. But what does worry me is what the CFMEU are saying they want to do in Western Australia, my home state. They basically want pattern bargaining. So in other words, they want to apply to construction industry in Western Australia this one-size-fits-all policy. Now, Peter, how does that work for business? Businesses, in particular in the construction industry, they are of different shapes, they are of different sizes. And I really question the capacity of smaller and medium businesses in the construction industry to actually survive if these types of terms and conditions are actually imposed on them via pattern bargaining. And ultimately, Peter, who loses out? The community. Why do the community lose out? Because they pay more. They pay more for roads, they pay more for schools, they pay more for hospitals.
Michaelia, what about reports today that Labor's put a loophole into its IR legislation that could allow union thugs and criminals back onto work sites?
Yep.
They used to have an entry permit, as I understand.
Right of entry permit.
What's going on
Yep.
here? What's going on here?
You got to love this one, Peter. Yep, so they don't talk about it before the election. They don't talk about it during the consultation phase of the bill. They don't put it in the legislation, but then they do a deal and miraculously this clause appears. That's transparency under Anthony Albanese. But let me tell you what it is. Under this, if a union official without a right of entry permit is invited onto a site by a health and safety representative, they have to be given entry. But what does this mean in reality? Well, Peter, a union official who's failed the fit and proper person test, they can now go onto site. A union official who's actually been stripped of their right of entry permit, perhaps, I don't know, criminal behaviour, bullish behaviour, thuggery, they can now go onto site. So again, big clap for Tony Burke and Anthony Albanese, because who have you delivered for? Nothing more and nothing less, the union movement in Australia, to the detriment of employers.